Hello and welcome to The Road to Autonomy. I'm your host, Grayson Brulte. The Road to Autonomy is brought to you in part by Stantec Generation AV. Stantec Generation AV combines some of the most experienced AV experts in the industry with the resources of a global engineering firm. Stantec Generation AV provides education, consulting, assessment, and guidance to any industry interested in autonomous vehicles. Learn more at stantec.com. Hello and welcome to The Road to Autonomy. I'm your host, Grayson Brulte. On today's episode, we're absolutely honored to have Pat Dillon, Chief Financial Officer, Flock Freight. Welcome to the podcast, Pat.
Great. Thank you very much for having me.
I'm excited to have you here because the freight market's going to go through interesting times. Right now, it's growing. Who knows in the future? So I can't wait for you to shed light on the freight market today.
It's a super interesting market, a large market, and one where there's a lot of innovation happening right now.
There's a lot of innovation happening, but then there's this thing called a recession. Bloomberg's putting United States recession probability forecast at 50%. The inflation rate in the United States is 8.3%. Analysts at BlackRock are projecting a hard landing for the U.S. economy. As CFO, how are you preparing Flock Freight for potential economic downturn?
That's a good question. We are certainly cognizant of the broader macro environment and how that impacts our business. It certainly means that as consumer behavior changes or industrial production, the demand for freight transportation has an impact on that. So that certainly translates into our business. One of the nice things about being a growth stage business like Flock Freight is that we are still a very, very small percentage of a very large market. So for us, it's much more about getting adoption of some of our innovative offerings and technologies and being able to take share rather than being as impacted by the broader market ups and downs in the freight market. So we certainly feel it, and we're certainly taking prudent steps to be prepared if we do go fully into a recession. But for a company at our stage, it's a little less impactful as it would be for a more mature, established company.
What are those innovative offerings that Flock's offering to the market?
Well, Flock, what we are doing is we're a digital technology company focused on the freight space. We're asset light logistics. And really what we've made is our calling card. And we, to our knowledge, we're really the only company on the planet that's doing this is what's called shared truckload. So if you think about freight transportation today, there are two primary modes of hauling freight by a truck. One is called full truckload, and that's where a shipper buys the entire trailer. 53 feet is the most prominent size of a trailer. Or if you have less than 53 feet, you can also move it through what's called the LTL market. So that's where you can ship one pallet or four pallets, and that goes through a hub and spoke warehouse system where it's going to get moved on multiple trucks and handled multiple different times. Where we really, our bread and butter and where our shared truckload technology is geared towards is people that have somewhere between 10 and 40 feet, linear feet to ship. So it's inefficient to buy an entire 53-foot truckload in order to ship less than 53 feet, and to ship on the LTL market that has delays in timing as well as increased damage as the freight gets handled a lot. So a level of service that is less than a full truckload. We actually, by using proprietary algorithms, what we can do is pool freight. So shared truckload would mean that we could take a 20-foot shipment from customer A and a 25-foot shipment from customer B and pool those together into a single truckload so that never has to go on a hub and go through a warehouse, and you're getting point-to-point transportation. So it's essentially carpooling for freight. Sounds like a simple enough idea, but to actually get that to line up where the pickup times and sequences and locations and the drop-off times, sequences, and locations line up, and doing that at a rate that makes sense for the shipper and for the trucker who's fulfilling that is quite complicated. And that's where the machine learning and artificial intelligence that we've developed, as well as the data set from being at this for 6+ years, really pays off and allows us to give high level of service, economic savings, and environmental and other societal benefits.
Carpooling for freight, that's awesome. I like that. So I'm going to give you an example. You could tell me if I'm right or if I'm wrong. There's a lot of mines in northern Nevada, and there's recently the big lithium discovery in the Salton Sea in California. There's multiple companies operating in the Salton Sea. There's multiple companies operating in northern Nevada. If they say company A needs to move 10 feet, company B needs to move 10 feet, and company C needs to move 20 feet. Can you pull those all together and go from northern Nevada down to the Salton Sea in California? Is that an example?
Yeah, it's a perfect example. Being able to pull 2 or 3 shipments together if you have pickup points where it makes sense, where they're either clustered together or along the same route. Because you can't, if you were to go from Los Angeles to Seattle to New Mexico to Chicago, it doesn't really make sense because the driver's doing so much out of route mileage that you can't make the economics work. But if you have multiple pickup points in Southern California and multiple drop off points in Nevada or vice versa, you can actually make this work where, from a driver's perspective, he or she has a little bit of outer route mileage for multiple pickup points and multiple drop off points, but the economic potential, because you're pooling multiple shipments together, is actually greater for the driver. And from the shipper's perspective, your next best alternative, if you have 10 feet or 20 feet, might be an LTL carrier where it'll take a long time for that shipment to actually make it to the destination and you have a higher risk of damage. Or you might say that I want point to point service. And my next best alternative, if you didn't have shared truckload, would be to buy a full 53-foot trailer, even though you only need 20 feet. If you think about the truck freight market, it's set up with a standardization on trailer size, and that makes sense from a safety perspective and for a general standardization across the ecosystem. But freight is not standard. Freight comes in all different shapes and sizes and weights. And right now we sort of have this barbell approach where you've got the LTL market on one side and you've got the truckload market on the other side. And what shared truckload does by using digital technology is allows you to go across that continuum and serve a huge swath of that market that today isn't very well served without STL.
Obviously, there's a cost savings, but from an environmental perspective, you're a certified B Corporation. What is the carbon savings for the individuals that are going to choose Flock to ship their freight?
Well, we think about it as up to 40% from a carbon emissions savings. And you can think about that very intuitively. It's all about utilization of assets. So if somebody is, their next best alternative is to ship 20 or 25 feet on a 53-foot trailer, and by using the STL technology, we can pair that with another 25-foot shipment, you're sending one truck instead of 2 trucks. Now, there's a little bit of outer route mileage, as I described earlier, but you're actually taking the asset, the scarce asset, both the truck and the driver, and you're getting much higher utilization. So that means that there's much less miles driven and much less carbon emitted. It means that the roadways are less congested. That has a safety implication, and it makes better use of, what has been a pretty significant driver shortage as well. So you're taking this scarce asset, which is safe professional drivers, and you're able to better utilize their time. So I think it's a great example of a bunch of inefficiency where we do estimate that a significant portion of the trucks that are on the road today have empty space on them, and you're able to increase that utilization. It has that economic benefit, but also a much larger environmental and societal benefit.
Are you seeing more shippers move towards Flock due to the corporate pressure around ESG mandates and the potential rulings coming down from the SEC on disclosures?
It's certainly a consideration, particularly for some of the larger enterprise level shippers. But I would just say that environmental is certainly a consideration, but it has to work as a business matter. So it has to provide better service and better economics for the shipper in order for it to be part of the consideration set. And each one of our customers has a different perspective on how important ESG considerations at large are. So it's nice to have, but it's got to work just based on the economics and the business case first and foremost.
Thank you for saying economics. At the end of the day, it comes down to economics. If it's more efficient and it's less carbon intensive, companies are going to flock that. The other thing that we're seeing is freight tonnage is up. It's increased 7.4% in August 2022, according to the American Trucking Association. This is 285 basis points stronger than the 10-year average. In your opinion, what's causing this demand?
Well, there is a little bit of a catch-up effect from a depressed economic environment post-COVID. So we are seeing levels that are consistent with where we were in 2019, which was elevated relative to the 10-year average. So as the economy chugs along and we start to get through some of the COVID dislocation, we're starting to see, we keep seeing a very strong and robust economy, despite some of the very valid points you raised about the warning signs that we've seen around a recessionary risk, but it hasn't really translated into a drop in tonnage yet. Where we have seen it is that the freight rates have started to come down in the market over the last 3 to 6 months, as we've actually seen the supply side of the market responding to all the tightness that we saw in the supply chain headlines that people probably read about. Made a lot of people decide that if you were going to be able to earn good money as a trucker, or if you were an established carrier, you wanted to add more trucks and power units into your fleet. We've started to see the supply side swell up and rates starting to come down. So it's a very dynamic market on both the demand and the supply side.
What's going to happen if we start to, or said earlier, go into recession? We see consumer spending decline. Just using the barometer, that means less spending at Target, less spending at Amazon, and let's say unemployment goes to 5% in 2024. Will that continue to take the tonnage rates down?
Yeah, it definitely could, right? And the U.S. economy is driven largely by the U.S. consumer, roughly 2/3, I think you would say, and it generally leads industrial production. So it's something that as a team we're watching quite closely. But at the same time, it could still be a good freight environment, just depending upon what is happening on the supply side, which sometimes can be a little bit disjointed from what's happening on the demand side. So right now, in this extreme kind of rate environment decline that we've seen, we're starting to see whether there's going to be some kind of a bottoming as the supply side capacity starts to exit the marketplace. So carriers start to reduce the number of trucks that they have out on the road, or smaller carriers decide to go off and do something different with their time. And that's the way that these cycles ebb and flow. So it's a dynamic market. The one thing that you never see from a trucking perspective is the volumes that really crater or spike. It's actually, the volatility is fairly stable when you compare it to what's going on in the broader economy. And that's indicative of just what a big market this is, and that all the goods that you might have in your home or office most likely came on a truck at some point in their journey.
It is the great line. If you bought it, a truck brought it. And I totally subscribe to that. And so let's just hone in on a certain region, the southeast of the United States. There's a lot of, Ford has announced that they're building a plant in Tennessee. SK Innovation is building one as well for batteries. And we're starting to see a lot of development in the southeast around electric vehicles and factories. Will that demand to bring in those materials to build the factories to bring in the battery cathodes, do you think that will kind of pick up there as we go into a potential slower economy?
Absolutely. I think anytime when you're seeing industrial production, it always comes with freight, inbound, outbound, whether it's construction related. You just can't produce the hard goods that we all come to enjoy and rely upon without freight transportation for raw materials or finished product going out. So any of that kind of capital formation around production and manufacturing has a freight impact, and we see it as a positive catalyst for us. So what will that mean specifically for Flock Freight? I can't quite quantify it, but it's always good for freight transportation to see that demand.
What other positive catalysts do you see coming in the freight market?
Yeah, I think for freight in general, it's been a really interesting period where you've started to see a market that had been sort of undifferentiated by technology as a general matter start to really adopt new technologies. So that can be alternative propulsion systems, telematics, autonomous and assisted driving technology, and more germane to what we're doing at Flock Freight, just new ways of doing business that are enabled by innovative digital technologies. And that is great to prove out in concept, but customer adoption is really important. And we're talking about a B2B business, so dollars and cents really matter. But there's also long established ways of doing business. And one of the things that's really important when you're doing something new, like what we're doing at Flock Freight, is being able to get the attention of the folks that are responsible for freight transportation at shippers and saying that we actually have a better way and it's worth your time to consider whether or not this will really help your business. And it might require you to change some of your processes as well. So the overall environment of innovation and shippers and their transportation departments being really focused on keeping up with that innovation is a great market environment for someone like Flock, who has something truly different to offer.
You got the market's attention. I want to highlight something here. Flock Freight's been on the CNBC Disruptor 50 list for 2 years now. Last year, number 42. This year, You're at number 14, so you're climbing. You're going in the right direction. Impressive and well done. Are you starting to get larger and larger carriers and shippers and customers coming and saying, okay, hey, you guys are growing. You're getting recognized here?
Yeah, I think we are. And it's obviously the attention is great and the recognition for everything that the team has done here, both about the innovation in creating a true third way to move freight that solves a big problem. The way that we go about it, being a B Corp, as you mentioned earlier, we think is very unique in the marketplace. And, focusing on the carbon reduction that comes from our technology and the way that we go about our business. So we have been able to get the attention of some of the larger shippers. And I will say, I'll share an anecdote that there's a very large shipper that has a ton of truck freight volume. And we were meeting with them in just the last couple of weeks. And they said, we've seen everything and anything under the sun when it comes to new technology in the freight world, but we've never seen what Flock is doing on shared truckload. And if you can take all of our partially full trailers and turn those into shared truckload, the savings opportunity is absolutely massive for us. And so for us, as a company that's relatively young, it's an awesome validation of everything we're doing. And it's also a challenge from an execution perspective for us to step up and be able to service some of the world's largest shippers and help them save money and be more environmentally friendly, all these societal benefits. We're at that stage now where we're really executing on that. And it's really exciting to see the progress.
With the shippers facing outside of Maersk, the Netherlands, they're facing compressed margins. Has shared truckloads been done before, or did the team at Flock stumble upon a really great idea and now you're executing on it?
The idea is simple. The execution of the idea is complicated. So the idea has been out there and been tried before. But in order to be able to pool the freight, you really need a lot of data. So I'll dive in a little bit into how our business model works. We are asset light, so we don't own any of the trucks. We actually have a network of carriers that fulfill our freight obligations to our shipper customers. So when we first book a shipment from, let's call it carrier A, and they say we have 30 linear feet that we want you to move, we're not sure if we're going to be able to find shipper B to give us the shipment that goes with it. And we're not sure what carrier is going to be around to be able to fulfill that and be willing to do multiple pickup points and multiple drop-off points and what they're going to charge us. So we need an immense amount of data and we need predictive analytics to be able to make a price to shipper A for that first shipment. And then as soon as we have it, we generally have between 2 hours to a couple of days to be able to go out and find the other end of that, the other shipment, shipment B, and then find a carrier that's going to be able to fulfill it. And we have to be able to do the pickup point in the right sequence because the first one picked up, it ends up at the front of the trailer. It needs to be the last one to be dropped off. So you actually have a whole bunch of different variables that you're solving for, and the combinatorial mathematics get to be quite complex. And so for us to be able to just be able to make that first offering to shipper A, we need to have a whole bunch of probabilistic bets essentially on what about the other shipper and what about the carrier. And if we get it wrong, we lose money. So we are not like, and when you book an Uber instantaneously in real time, if you're a rider, you're being matched with a driver. We're actually giving you the cost of it and giving that as a guarantee and then going out and fulfilling the rest of the transaction. So that's why it's so hard to do. And why, while people can understand carpooling for freight, very simple, I understand exactly what it is. To actually do it, you need intense technology, knowledge of the freight system, and you really need to have a lot of data. And we've been at this since 2015. And it took a long time for the team to get it started. And it's great to see it really bearing fruit and really, especially over the last couple of years, take off in such a dramatic way.
Did I hear that right? Let's call it customer A. They get a price and then you guarantee that price for customer A and then when you go find the match?
Yes, that's right. So we don't know exactly how profitable customer A's shipment is going to be until we figure out if we find customer B to put another shipment on it. And then we find the carrier who's actually able to go out and fulfill our obligations on it. So that's why there is a lot of risk in the business model if you don't have the data and the technology to go out and execute.
To me, if I'm customer A, you're giving me certainty around pricing. I already know my models, and if it's working, all of a sudden now you got a very happy repeat customer. Is that a big of your growth trajectory of repeat customers?
Absolutely. When you think about what has happened in the freight market, especially during the pandemic. So during the pandemic, the world shut down and consumers shifted their behavior from services to goods. And the market for truck freight was not ready for it. And that's why you heard about supply chain challenges, couldn't find enough trucks to be able to move basic commodities. And we saw that shippers were under intense pain. What might have been a $2 a mile route became a $3 a mile route. And that was the perfect door opening for Flock Freight because it allowed us to say, we have a new solution that can help solve your problem. And the shippers were willing to take the call and listen and think about how they could change their operating model to incorporate shared truckload. But once we got shared truckload, we had to deliver. That means a high level of service. We have to be there and pick up and deliver when we say we're going to. We have to be able to deliver a price point that is delivering real efficiency savings from an economic perspective. And then it's on a sliding scale, but being able to show some of the ESG and societal benefits is sort of icing on the cake. But we've been really happy with our retention of our customers. Once we get them to try shared truckload on Flock, we have a very, very good retention rate. And we've been able to show the power of the model and the partnership.
There was reports during the depth of COVID. I believe it was a Goldman Sachs report. They flew a drone out there. There were 70 cargo ships off of the port of Long Beach, San Pedro, and they had to come in there and they're storing it in the San Pedro neighborhood. This seems to me that the supply chain headaches of the last 2 years have been a growth mechanism for you because you're able to, let's say you're coming in the port of LA, you have to make a stop in Bakersfield, and you have to make a stop in Reno. Was that a growth mechanism there for you?
Well, I mean, I certainly wouldn't say it was an intentional part of a strategy. I don't think anybody saw COVID and the supply chain disruptions coming. But for anybody who's an entrepreneur or developing a new technology that solves a problem, you need your customer base to be able to acknowledge that there is that same problem, and they have to be motivated that they need to solve that problem. And so for us, that pain point became acute. And to the point I was making earlier, it really focused the attention of the shipper community on what other types of technologies or offerings can help me either get under my budget, just move the freight that I need to. There's just this scarce asset in terms of the number of trucks and drivers that are out there. How do we keep our trailers more full? And STL really started to make a ton of sense. In an environment where there isn't that kind of a level of acute pain from the average transportation manager, he or she may say, that sounds great in concept, but I'm under my budget already. Things are moving pretty smoothly. All of my existing carriers are taking the loads that I'm offering to them. So it was certainly a moment in time, and we took full advantage of it in terms of being able to grow and sort of evangelize folks on shared truckload.
There's another moment in time that could or could not happen. A wave of consolidation generally happened in recessions. Morgan Stanley, your old home, they're accelerating the restructuring department. They're hiring hundreds of people for that. If M&A and a wave of consolidation comes to the trucking industry, what impact will that have on Flock Freight?
We don't see it as necessarily in and of itself as having much of an impact to us. So the first thing for folks who are not familiar with the trucking market is this is a hyper fragmented market. So Knight-Swift is the largest asset-based carrier, and I think they have about a 1% or 2% market share of the entire US market. And we're talking about somewhere between an $800 billion to $1 trillion market for the US alone for truck freight, depending upon different estimates that you see out there. So a level of consolidation is sort of not unusual or unforeseen in that it's pretty fragmented as it is. I think one of the interesting things will be to watch what's the rationale behind the consolidation. Is it to get bigger just for scale's sake? Or is it going to be the type of transactions that we've seen so far where you actually start to see folks adding a new leg of the strategic stool, meaning a new mode of transportation that you're able to offer to your customers, or being able to get better access to new and innovative technologies? And to the point I was making earlier about customer adoption, if we're starting to see some of these larger players start to consolidate in order to facilitate with their customers new modes of transportation and new technology, I think on the margin that's actually helpful in terms of customer adoption and customer general awareness that there are new types of technologies that they should be taking a look at. But the punchline is, unlike a lot of other markets that might already be pretty consolidated, where further consolidation has significant pressure on margins, this is not that type of market. It's hyper fragmented, and we don't see it having much of a day-to-day impact from that perspective on Flock Freight.
On the new technology front, what's going to happen when autonomous trucks get integrated into the U.S. trucking industry?
Well, I mean, I think like a lot of things, there are big problems throughout the truck freight world, and big problems are big opportunities. And that's how do you create new capacity when you're constrained on the number of drivers. And so really, autonomous trucks and Flock Freight, you're sort of playing on a lot of the same themes, which is how to get better utilization and how to create capacity. Look, autonomous, we can all, and I'm sure you could educate your listeners on all sorts of different perspectives on when and how much from a penetration perspective of autonomous trucks. We will see them at some point coming out onto the roadway. But we really don't see this as mutually exclusive at all. There's going to need to be a multitude of new technologies into the freight space that will help address some of these shortages or these underutilization issues that are at the core of what we're doing. And look, as autonomous gets better and better, at some point, does autonomous capacity be a potential service provider for shared truckload? I mean, of course, right? It just depends upon when autonomous can actually do what a skilled professional driver can do with multiple pickup points and multiple drop-off points. So it's one where we're encouraged all across the freight ecosystem, across different modes, about new and innovative technologies. And the nice thing about being part of a really, really big market where our market share is certainly measured in basis points, not in percentage points, is that none of this stuff is mutually exclusive. And we're just excited overall to see new technologies that are transforming the freight ecosystem to be more efficient, to be safer, to be more environmentally friendly. It's all very consistent with the mission of Flock Freight.
What other new technologies do you see coming online that will have a positive impact on the freight industry?
Well, certainly we've seen the environmental focus being out there and alternative propulsion technologies that are starting to come online, particularly here in our home state of California. That's an exciting development when you think about the overall mission. And certainly we'll start to see that from the carrier network, the folks that actually own the trucks and have the drivers that fulfill this as part of the Flock Freight network. Starting to incorporate those new technologies is definitely exciting. And then, look, there has been maybe not as much fanfare associated with it, but telematics where you can actually understand where the truck is. I know that sounds like very basic to a lot of folks, but more adoption around that type of tracking technology and allowing all of the integration so that the customer, particularly if they're shipping, 20 feet with us, they can understand where their freight is, how it's moving. And we've certainly done a lot of work on integrating with some of the telematics platforms that are on the power units and trucks that we have in our network. So there's a lot of really exciting things, smart trailer technology. The list goes on and on people that are sort of approaching the freight ecosystem. And sometimes people will ask me, well, who's going to win? It seems like a lot of people doing a lot of different things. I just say you have to remember just how large this market is, and it's going to take a lot of different solutions to start to make a dent in some of the issues.
There's a great saying I like, there's riches and niches. If you look at telematics, for example, there is a very popular movement globally, a farm to table. I could see putting telematics in the reefer truck that's going from, say, Bob and Jane's farm to the produce warehouse to eventually to the Michelin star restaurant. They want to know the provenance of that, where it came from, how there, what are the temperatures. So that's a really great thing there. And I'm going to go out on a limb here because I'm really curious about this. Let's just use we already used the term shipper A, so let's use the term shipper H for hydrogen. What you see in the future where as green hydrogen comes online, refueling comes online, where you have certain customers that say, hey, Pat, hey, Flock Freight, we'd really like to ship this on a carbon neutral green hydrogen truck. And then will you coordinate that? Because there are probably other customers that would like that as well.
Look, they're not out there yet, but obviously we follow that. And so to the extent that there could be a preference for a zero tailpipe emission service, these are exactly the kinds of things that we take into account with Flock Freight on how to serve our customers. And I think you take the old way of doing things where you say it's an LTL and it's, this level of service and it's this price versus it's truckload and it's that level of service and that price. And those are essentially your two options to move from point A to point B. We're now STL, we're starting to give you pricing from 1 to 53 feet in the trailer. We do things like carbon offsets for the emissions associated with the route that we're going to run for the customer. And so you could see as a natural extension of that, thinking about what kind of a power unit. Now, don't put me on the spot and don't want to get a call from my CEO saying, why are you promising a product that doesn't exist yet? But look, I mean, it would be very in keeping with the ethos of this. And these are the types of conversations that we have all the time at Flock Freight.
Well, you might not have it today. I'm not going to ask you for a timeline. It's a natural evolution because your customers will ask for it. And that demand, I believe, over time will only grow. And if we can figure out all electric semis, then perhaps that's another alternative. Or if somebody invents another carbon neutral technology, we're clearly going towards a low carbon society. And overall, how do you see Flock's business growing over the next decade? Because it seems like you're gearing up for a period of massive growth here.
Yeah. So the first thing to think about is what's the true market opportunity for us. And we certainly see this 10 to 40 feet, linear feet within the trailer as a multiple hundreds of billions of dollar opportunity for us. So it's a massive market. We're just starting to scratch the surface. And it's going to be driven by folks that are really focused on efficiency. I mean, it's simple math around being able to offer you a comparable level of service or an enhanced level of service at a better price. But it also requires people to think about a new way of doing business. Just to give sort of a very summary and probably overly simplified way of thinking about it, in a lot of shippers, there's sort of an LTL department and there's a truckload department. And we come to them and say, we've got shared truckload. And they say, that sounds really interesting, but we don't have a shared truckload department. And we don't have in our transportation management system a shared truckload button that you would press for this. So a lot of this is around channel and just getting people comfortable with it and the adoption. That becomes kind of a flywheel and a virtuous circle as one customer in a particular space, when they're shipping, if they start to adopt STL and they're able to get a benefit in terms of being able to lower their cost, their competitors are also going to need to do that. And this is not trivial, right? The estimates vary, but it's a maybe 10 cents on the dollar of every good that you buy is for freight transportation cost on average. So it's meaningful when you start to think about that across large retailers, industrial production. It's a very significant cost savings opportunity, and getting that flywheel going is the hardest part. And that's why it is really exciting where we are right now.
You're well on your way. Think about that. The product can increase their margins, and that's really healthy for the business. So you mentioned 10 to 40 feet. That's the sweet spot. What type of items? Is it couches? Is it wheat? What are your majority of your customers? Have you seen a trend where like, aha, I never realized that we ship that much wheat in the United States? Is there anything that stood out to you?
No, I mean, we're fairly diversified in the types of goods that we ship. We don't really ship hazardous materials right now. And there are lots of complexities about shipper A's goods going with shipper B's goods. So if it's sensitive stuff where you can't break the seal on the truck, obviously that's not appropriate for us to be hauling it and it wouldn't work for us. But a lot of stuff from food and beverage items, sort of shelf stable type stuff, industrial goods, auto parts, to anything that looks like household goods. So it could be if you're relocating the US government, if they've got a military service member and he or she needs to move their goods because they're being deployed to or relocated from one location to another. I mean, so the list goes on and on. It's fairly diversified into what we can do. It's actually been really illuminating to find out just how much of that stuff is actually ready to go before you have a full trailer. And a lot of times our customers are saying, I kind of have to wait and hold things at the production facility until I have all 53 feet filled up. But instead, I can send a shipment at 20 feet or 30 feet and not feel the financial pain of basically buying a full trailer and shipping it half full. So that part has been particularly gratifying to see us be able to make such an impact on our customers' business.
It's having a positive impact. I'll give you an example. When I moved from California to Florida, the moving company, very great by the way, they had to take it and they had to wait and ship to pool it with something else. And it saved me a ton of money because this other company said, oh, we're going to give you this whole truck and you'll bring all your stuff. I don't need a whole truck. I sold everything. But the model worked and it saved me a lot of money and they did a really great job. Pat, in your opinion, what does the future of freight look like?
It will be I think, a constant evolution. I don't see a big bang moment where there's one solution that totally changes the face of freight transportation. But I do see this gradual evolution of new technologies that are making freight transportation more sustainable, more efficient, broader societal benefits from safety. And all these things need to layer together to really change what has been an industry that up until pretty recently has looked more or less the same for several decades. Now, there have been other evolutions along the way, but it really has been an interesting time in terms of the amount of technology that's coming. So I think what you'll see is, more if you are a player in freight, you will need to be able to have a more diversified approach in terms of the offerings that you give to your customers. Certainly don't see any slowdown in the on-demand economy in terms of needing to get things from point A to point B more quickly. But I think being kind of tied to an old way of doing things and saying your choice is our A or B, that way of thinking is starting to go by the wayside, and where you need to be able to meet your customers' needs, whether it be for the size of the shipment, the pickup time, the service level, or even kind of things that are on the come still that you mentioned, like what is the environmental footprint of that load? All of these different things and giving them the menu of different options. I think you're only going to see that trend continue to increase.
As more and more entrepreneurs move into the freight space, do you think the technology evolution will keep moving faster and faster and faster, with the bottom line being this industry becomes fully optimized at some point?
Trying to define what fully optimized is going to be difficult, but you can sort of see a corollary as to what happened after the internet revolution in the 90s and the early 2000s. At that point, we really saw the way that we move information around, stored, analyzed, distributed, was completely revolutionized by the internet and subsequent technological innovations like cloud computing. Now, in freight, you're dealing with atoms, not bits, and that's harder. And there's a lot more variables that you need to contend with. But you can see that the way it's going has some parallels to what has happened in the way that we move information around. And I think that is only going to accelerate. I think we're in the early innings of this. And we love to see entrepreneurs that are coming into the space, new capital, recognizing the opportunity that's there, and governments, frankly, that are starting to get really wise to what technological innovation can do to help supply chains be more efficient and be more environmentally friendly and be safer. It's really exciting time to see in the freight space.
It's a very exciting time. It's a great time for entrepreneurship. We learned a lot over the last 2 years. And I never thought I would say this when 6, 7-year-olds and 8-year-olds knew what a supply chain is. And you had to explain to it why the Legos couldn't come because of supply chain. And they're going to school and they're having conversations about supply chain. It's completely changed because of that dynamic. And Pat, as we look to wrap up this insightful conversation, what would you like our listeners to take away with them today?
Well, look, I'm super excited to be here at Flock Freight, and I appreciate the opportunity to tell your listeners a little bit about what we're doing. But I think at the heart of what we're trying to address is a freight ecosystem today that is inflexible and has, for much of the freight marketplace, from this 10 to 40 linear feet, imperfect options that we've created a new option, a third way of moving freight called shared truckload. So if you think about the 3 ways of moving freight, I hope the listeners will remember there's LTL and TL as the traditional modes. And now there's shared truckload, which has been pioneered and invented by Flock Freight.
It's been pioneered and invented. If you need to move 10 to 40 feet, call Pat and the team at Flock Freight. It's a great technology. It's a technology that's great for the environment. Plus, it'll get your margins up. Economics always matters, I always say, because the future's bright, the future's autonomous, and the future is Flock Freight. Pat, thank you so much for coming on the road to autonomy today.
Awesome. Thank you, Grayson.
Thank you for listening to the Road to Autonomy podcast. If you've enjoyed listening, please rate, review, and subscribe on your favorite podcast platform. Want to get in touch? Follow us on Twitter at Road to Autonomy or email podcast@brulteco.com. The Road to Autonomy is produced by Brulte & Company. The views and opinions expressed on the Road to Autonomy podcast do not necessarily reflect the views and opinions of Brulte & Company. The content discussed on this podcast is for informational purposes only and should not be taken as legal, tax, investment, or business advice.